James is to the point. He doesn't kind of, add glitter or cushions to anything to make it hit you a little bit nicer. He just tells you like it is. When we began reading the book of James, one of the first revelations that James shared with us, now remember, James is biologically the younger brother of Jesus, raised by Mary and Joseph, grew up in a great Jewish household with Jesus as his big brother. He admits in the beginning of the book of James, as he starts these teachings and observations on the church, that he himself, his biggest vice, the biggest temptation, the biggest sin he falls into, is when he gets angry, he says horrible things. And he says, here I am as the brother of Jesus, as a famous teacher in the church, and I let my temper get the best of me, and I say awful things. And it does not represent Christ or the church or who I'm meant to be and called to be as a teacher of the faith. He said, because my anger gets the best of me. And he admits that and teaches that to the church. And then he teaches in this whole letter all these observations he's had visiting churches. And I've been revealing to you a little bit more about James every week. Now, I'd love to say that all of that is in my head and I've always known all of that. I don't. I haven't. There's lots of books in my office and in my house, and the internet is available. And I'm able to look these things up and try to remember things I'm sure I was taught at one point, but my head's only so big, to understand who James is. So James, yes, is the biological young brother of Jesus, one of Jesus' siblings. And James becomes a leader in the church. James is martyred after he becomes an adult and spends 30 years in ministries. He's killed for his faith. We talked about how James is very to the point and teaches things very matter-of-factly and is very honest and humble about who he is and where his problems lie in his own faith journey. I told you last week that Martin Luther did not like what James wrote because James had this partnership of works and faith together, whereas Martin Luther wanted to raise faith above everything else as the most important virtue. And James said, well, you can't have faith and not do something about it. But he didn't level it above his faith. He said these things go together. You have faith and therefore you act like it. And for the early reformers, James was not a book they focused on. It made them uncomfortable. But another truth about James is James became the leader of the church, the equivalent of an early pope or patriarch in Jerusalem, the leader. Because obviously he's Jesus' brother. He has some street credibility in this. But in being the leader of the church, many historians wrote that he was kind of ruthless in doing that. And in the time that he led the church and was recognized, although there wasn't an institutional church, his kind of fame, his celebrity, many people turned to him for advice. That's why he wrote this book of now in Scripture. And the people looked at James and said, you're a great teacher, but you have no training to teach. All you have is you grew up with Jesus. And for the people who were teaching without that genetic line, that direct link to Jesus, they were trying to elevate their own popularity as teachers, and there was a lot of friction between James and other early church leaders, the apostles, for instance, who thought maybe they had more power because they had been chosen by Jesus to teach and lead the church. So for all the wonderful things James does, he doesn't live in a vacuum. He has some people who praise him and love him, and some people who think he should keep his mouth shut. I told you, he basically becomes a professional church visitor. He visits congregations that are starting and spends a couple times worshiping with them, practicing the sacrament, learning and teaching, and trying his best to just be someone in the pews. But it's hard once people figure out who he is. So in understanding that role in the early church and thinking about James as a teacher and disciple, the other part of this that you can learn, by looking at an encyclopedia, you still have them to dust off on your shelves or other places. When I'm preparing for sermons, I like to look up, and what context is this person in? So sometimes, and I've shared with many of you that I'm bothered by the fact that in our American education system, we learn history in one arm, and we never learn the religious side of that, because we're afraid no matter what religion it is, we might do something taboo. So chronologically, when I think about teachers and how Jesus taught, and you're in the Roman Empire in the 1st century, timeline-wise, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, they're all 300 to 400 years before the birth of Jesus. So you think about chronology, what type of teachers were people looking up to? Who were the famous philosophers, rhetoricians? When people are like, I want to go hear a great teacher, they might be referring to Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, these kind of rhetoricians, these people who could gather a room full of people and teach and debate in a way that was really well-educated and wise. And that had been happening for centuries before Jesus came. That model of teaching, that model of debate, the fact that all the men in town would get together and share ideas, and it was okay to disagree because that helped all of us learn more. And then you had Jesus enter. as he is telling stories. But think about the friction of the leadership hearing his stories and saying, well, this is not the way we're used to learning. Educated, nomadic preachers, teachers, scholars who come to town to teach them sort of great wisdom, they don't teach like this. They invite friction. They invite a contrast of ideas. They like to shout over one another. And they invite discussion. And here's Jesus either defending himself against accusations or telling stories. It doesn't fit the model. So you have James and the other apostles who now are going to teach the way Jesus taught and try to share this message of discipleship and this good news about Christ in a method and a style of teaching that hasn't been used over the past 400 years. It's not what people are used to. If you're a proper teacher, you teach this way. And that's not the way the early church is teaching, which makes some people curious and attracted to it, but it makes the establishment uncomfortable with it. So that being said and thought of, I want to invite you to kind of tell the rest of the sermon yourself at your tables. So in front of you is the scripture, which many of you laughed at the very first couple words. Not many of you should become teachers. And yet ironically, we were all called disciples of Jesus to be teachers of our faith. I had a colleague a few years ago at a different church tell me that preparing a sermon or a Bible study is like going to the grocery store. You fill your cart up, but then your guests come home and eat one meal out of that cart. And all that other great good stuff you got is only for you. They only get that one meal. So in preparing for a sermon, there's a lot of stuff that I get to learn, which is exciting, that's my profession, but it doesn't all get shared with you. And some of what I glean is going to be different than what you glean from that scripture or that lesson that day. So in thinking that we ourselves are teachers, as well as students of the Word, we're then asked to share them. So the big idea, the question we have today is, how can you live out your faith as a disciple through the words you choose to say or not say? So in the time of Christ, speaking publicly and teaching was an art form. There was a way to do rhetoric. There was a way to debate. There was a scholarly way of engaging in this. So sometimes you opened your mouth and offered a great lesson. And other times, if someone else was teaching really well, you just kept your mouth shut because they were going, let them go. They were doing a good job. Why complicate things? Or what they were saying was so offensive, you needed to bite your tongue and not get yourself in trouble. And that's the issue James had. When someone else said something heretical or ridiculous, he pounced on them and would shout back the right answer, which was not a very attractive way of teaching. And he admitted it depleted his ability to make disciples because he was always angry at people who were misrepresenting Christ. So I want you around your tables, we're going to take 5-6 minutes to do this, to think of that question. How do we live out our faith as disciples through the words we may choose to say or not say? So maybe you have a story of a time where you were, at an office meeting and afterwards people are chatting and someone's sharing their faith and you know it's ludicrous what they're saying. Did you intervene? Did you not? Are there people in your family who worship in other flavors of Christianity? And sometimes you wonder what they're thinking. Do you open your mouth? Do you not? When you encounter an atheist, agnostic, a non-practicing Christian, you have the opportunity to share testimony of your faith. How do you do that? How do you teach in a way that's received well? It doesn't sound like you're pounding a soapbox on the corner with your ideas. So you can take this conversation wherever you'd like to. And if you don't feel there's enough people at your table and you want to combine tables, that's fine too. But take a few minutes around the table, and if you'd like to share how you teach your faith to others through not only what you say, but also maybe through the times you choose not to say anything. I'll let you go with that.